Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you to our webinar today. My name is Susan Marlow, and I am the Director of Client Solutions in our Innovation Office. And I'm very excited today to have so many of you joining, and we're very excited to share some of the technology that we've been working on, and we believe that we can really make a big difference in the world in the flooding areas. So we want to have you be prepared for the unexpected. We like to start every webinar off with a safety moment, and I thought this would be a perfect one for this particular one. So most flooding incidents where people are actually drowning is when they are trying to go through water, either walking or driving. So when you see a flooded area, especially a road area, turn around, don't drown. That's our safety moment for the day. As I said, my name is Susan Marlow, and I will be your moderator today, but I've got some experts with us today, as well as one of our esteemed clients. Katherine Osborne will be presenting today. She is a client executive in our Digital Solutions department of the Innovation Office, and she has a background in water resources engineering. Curtis Smith is also joining us, and he is a engineer also, and he's been doing a lot of our testing, and he's got a background with FEMA and water resources engineering. And Assaad Mrad is also with us. He leads our digital science team, and he has his PhD and is our machine learning operations director in digital solutions. In addition to that, we have Kent Archer. He is our client at the Tennessee Economic and Community Development Office, and that is the case study we're going to be presenting today. And Kent may not be able to stay on the webinar for the entire time, so we've asked him to just give us a little briefing, Kent, on TN Plan and the integration of Flood Predictor and some of the hopes and dreams you have for our communities that are using the product.
Yes, thank you, Susan. As Susan said, I'm Kent Archer. I'm with the Tennessee Department of Economic and Community Development. And a little bit of information and background on how all of this started was in 2017, the state of Tennessee, specifically our department, we received $44.5 million for disaster resilience and recovery efforts. It's through the Department of Housing and Urban Development. This was relatively unique and new at the time, and we formed a partnership with Stantec to help us with some of the project management and administration of the grant. But as a big portion of that too, they were working on some tools and some resources that we could use going forward, and Flood Predictor being one of those. So our disaster that this stemmed from was the flooding in West Tennessee in 2011. In some ways, those are historic, and specifically, the flood stage for the Mississippi River at that point was, if they measured a 1,000-year flood, it would have been that. So very unique and very high incidence. And so as we are dealing with the resilience and the recovery from that, Stantec began to work on, we first started with this TN plan. That has changed and morphed constantly over the last, well, now almost 7 years. That one is a little bit difficult for us to talk a lot about, because I feel like even today we're still not 100% sure on where it's going to be. Now, the Flood Predictor tool, on the other hand, is much more concrete, and I think the application is going to be pretty widespread. I think that what's most exciting about it for us is that, again, when it comes to disaster resilience and mitigation, it's a tool that can be used to run specific scenarios. It can also be used to incorporate real-time data, and I know that Susan and her team are going to go more in depth on that. But also, I think it has the ability for communities to use a tool like this for better and more comprehensive local planning efforts as well. So, what we're looking at with the parcels and the land that we want to develop, or sometimes developed land that we need to go back and mitigate to benefit our communities a little bit better. I think that this is specifically a tool that can be used across many disciplines, but to make a very large impact on what our communities, both rural and urban, look like in their development going forward. Susan, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, thank you, Kent, and I so appreciate you joining us today. And if you can stay on, that's great, but we understand that if you cannot, that's no problem at all. So thank you so much for that introduction. And like I said, I'll be showing the TN plan and the case study of the TN plan integration with Flood Predictor a little bit later in the webinar today. So the things that we're going to talk about today is identifying flood risk. What is Flood Predictor and how does it work? And then how can you use it? And then I'll show you the case study. And then after that, we'll go over the roadmap and then some Q&A. So if you have questions, be sure and put those in the chat, in the Q&A section. As you think of them, do that anytime during the presentation, but we will answer those at the end. And then also, we will be recording this, just so you know, and if we have anybody that is interested in it, we'll send it to all the attendees or everyone that registered. And then we also will provide a certificate for some continuing education credits for you as well. So as we begin, Katherine, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about identifying our flood risk.
Great, thank you, Susan. So in this next slide, this is an image provided by the National Weather Service, and this is the total number of flood-related fatalities for the United States from 2010 to 2021. So that's totaling 1,248 deaths. The dark green represents the areas that have had the highest fatalities, and then the light green with the lowest. And if we look over the past few years, 2021 was the third highest year for flood fatalities since 2010. 146 people died in 2021 due to flooding. So Tennessee experienced flash flooding of 20 inches of rain within 24 hours, and that fell between Waverly and McEwen, Tennessee. And then New Jersey had approximately 10 inches of rain from Hurricane Ida. And then in this next slide, in 2017, 179 people died from flooding. And this was the year that Hurricane Harvey dropped more than 60 inches of rain on Texas for over 8 days. And as Susan pointed out during the safety moment, the majority of these flood-related deaths are due to people who drive into the floodwaters, misjudging the depth of the water on the roadways, or who are unable to see the damage in the roadways underneath the floodwater, or who walk into floodwaters. So the best thing that we can do to prevent these flood-related deaths is to provide quality risk data before, during, and after an event. So before, through planning and preparedness, knowing what is likely to be impacted. During, through reliable emergency response, knowing where it's going to be impacted, which neighborhoods to evacuate, which roads to close, and then after through adequate post-disaster response. So how have the floods impacted these areas? Which areas need to be avoided, for how long? How should we update building codes, ordinances, and such? But the biggest problem with the quality risk data is it's not available everywhere. So this is a figure provided by FEMA showing the watersheds which have the most unmapped mileages. So where flooding sources have been identified, but they haven't been studied. So there's no flood data or floodplain associated with them. So that bright magenta colored watersheds, those represent the areas that have the most unmapped mileages. And this map represents approximately 1.3 million miles, which are unmapped, or a third of the identified mileages within the United States. And then in addition to the unmapped areas are the nation's most vulnerable and disadvantaged communities. So these communities, which have been identified by the White House's Climate and Economic Justice Screening Tool, they're hit the hardest by flooding. And you can see there's some overlap with the areas that are unmapped as well as disadvantaged. So these areas within the Southwest, Texas, South Dakota, the Appalachia, and coastal areas. But the problem with the availability of quality risk data is even intensified by an increase of disasters, which we've really seen over the last 20 years. So this increasing frequency of extreme weather due to climate change, we have an increasing population, increasing built environment, particularly in the high-risk areas. These are the key factors that are driving an increase in disasters and disaster-related impacts. So having the best available data provided to decision makers, particularly in the unmapped and vulnerable areas within the country, can really help alleviate the effect of these disasters and ultimately save lives, which is what we're trying to do. So traditional hydrologic and hydraulic analyses are both timely and costly, and many of our population just cannot afford to wait. So that's where Stantec's Flood Predictor can help. So Flood Predictor is a product that has been developed by Stantec that applies machine learning to over 30,000 hours of engineering modeling. So it can deliver fast, reliable, data-driven flood predictions. So Flood Predictor is trained on our traditional models or our physics-based models to influence the outputs of the machine learning model. And why is that important? Traditional modeling just really takes too long for effective decision support. But I want to be really clear that we are not trying to replace traditional modeling, but we do need a reliable data source to support decisions, especially for those areas with data gaps. So our traditional modeling and traditional data sets represent only part of the overall picture. So while we may know what the riverine 1% annual chance floodplain boundary is and what its associated impacts might be, but what about the areas outside of the 1% annual chance? And what happens if there's a flash flood? Specifically, what happens when there's 20 inches of rain in 24 hours? What if the terrain has changed since your last map update? How is climate change going to affect your community? And these are all scenarios that Flood Predictor can answer quickly, and that's due to the application of machine learning. So I'm going to turn it over to Assaad Mrad to give you a more detailed explanation on machine learning and how Flood Predictor works and performs.
Thank you, Katherine. So we've chosen to use machine learning primarily as a tool to combine with physics-based models like HEC-RAS, for example, high-fidelity models. In that sense, we're not using machine learning as its own standalone engine, but in fact, the machine learning engine that powers Flood Predictor depends deeply upon the quality of the results it uses to learn. And these come from physics-based models that are considered the gold standard for engineering. So where a physical model takes in assumptions and data and outputs, let's say, a floodplain or a depth grid, as you can see on the top of that slide, we can combine those model outputs that are probably just available in a few locations in the area of interest And then we can use machine learning to learn and emulate this physical model, which would allow us, therefore, to kind of extrapolate to areas beyond the original study area of the physical model. So this is how we're using the physical models and the machine learning model in conjunction with each other. Machine learning model results augment model performance from the physical models. They are able to, the machine learning model we use is able to provide high resolution data at low cost and very quickly. We're able to extrapolate to new areas and also test the accuracy and the correlation of the machine learning model outputs to the physical model, so we can give you a measure of uncertainty. Another advantage of machine learning is its ability to also provide probabilities for flooding, as well as binary predictions. And that's how we're using machine learning model based on the golden standard physics-based models to develop Flood Predictor. And to explain how we combine terrain data and others into features for the machine learning model, this figure shows a data pathway. So to create a floodplain, you start from a watershed. We retrieve data from various sources, such as terrain. Flood Predictor also utilizes land cover data sets, the latest available, soil data. What is the type of the soil? What is its infiltration capacity and whatnot? Where are the streams located? This is all contained within the National Hydrography data set. So we consider these to be the raw data that underlie the power of Flood Predictor. Now we combine this raw data into what are known as derivative data sets. And these are calculated from the raw data, like slope at the terrain and where the streets are and where the paved areas are. And then we create what are called dimensionless data. And these are then fed into the machine learning model to increase its ability to extrapolate from regions where physics-based model outputs exist to where they do not exist, to tie it back to one of the first few slides showing the high amount of unmapped areas, especially in the United States. And therefore, by going through that data pathway from raw data, we can use machine learning to create predictions that are highly correlated with gold standard physics-based models. And our latest comparisons between the machine learning model that powers Flood Predictor and the physics-based models, 2D HEC-RAS modeling for flash flooding and 1D for riverine flooding, have shown a high degree of correlation, which underlies our which basically underscores the power of machine learning to extrapolate to unmapped areas.
Great.
Please,
Thanks,
Catherine,
Assaad.
take it away. Thank you.
I appreciate it. So the applications for Flood Predictor are pretty vast, and I always love talking to people about Flood Predictor because each community's needs and plans on how they're going to use Flood Predictor are unique, but we've tried to summarize most of the potential applications here. So Flood Predictor can predict both riverine and flash flooding extents, probability, and depth. If we utilize weather data, predictions of impending storm events can be made in near real time. This is a great tool for mitigation, resilience planning, emergency management, and disaster response. And then we can also utilize future conditions land use and hydrology to create climate change-based predictions. So again, these are most beneficial to those areas that are unmapped or are no longer valid due to changes in topographic data, hydrology, terrain, land use. And this is really a great solution for areas with limited data. So we don't need survey data or structure data to be able to make predictions. We don't have to have an existing model in that area. And then because these predictions are quick, it works well for areas with limited budget and schedule. So if we come back to this image of flood risk before, during, and after an event, Flood Predictor can perform predictions for all of these scenarios. And this flexibility is really what makes Flood Predictor so unique. So we can run simulations on what is expected to occur using historic rainfall and flow data. We can simulate what is actually occurring using weather data, and then we can use data from actual events to replicate what happened during a flood. So I'd like to show you some examples now. This is an example of an area in eastern Kentucky. So last August, 40 people died due to flooding, and this area was widely unmapped. The preliminary data shown here was not made available until soon after the event. But Flood Predictor was able to model the same area very quickly and with a very high correlation back to the FEMA preliminary data. And then this next example is using Flood Predictor riverine methodology for an event in 2013 in San Antonio. So I think 15 inches of rain fell within 24 hours in this event. So you can see the high correlation with the imagery from the event to the Flood Predictor results. So roadways that were inundated show inundation within the results, and the ones that were not inundated show that the same within the model. So this is really testing that Flood Predictor can provide that quality data set in the event of an upcoming event that it's going to replicate nicely. And then this next slide is within Waverly, Tennessee, and it shows over 20 inches of rain within 24 hours. And again, several people passed away during this event, mostly due to driving within the floodwaters. But you can see those areas that flooded in the imagery from the event were predicted by Flood Predictor, and then even the areas that were not inundated. So you can see that low probability of flooding there as well. And I've mentioned that it is fast, but how fast is it really? So if you think back to that image of the unmapped areas within the United States, that 1.3 million miles, if we were to apply traditional methodology to those mileages, it would take probably 10 years to study all of those. But within Flood Predictor, we can study those mileages within a year. Now, if we were to narrow that scale down to a traditional watershed, hydrologic unit code 8, or about 1,600 square miles, that would take approximately 9 to 12 months for the hydrology and the hydraulics analysis alone. And then if we were to use Flood Predictor, we can set that model up within a day. And then once the model is set up, subsequent runs can take just minutes. So you can really apply different scenarios there. And then I'm going to turn it back over to Susan to talk about how to use Flood Predictor.
So hopefully by now you're wondering, how can I use Flood Predictor and how can I get access to it? So we have provided many different ways that you can do that. You can go to our website for one thing, and we can do a one-on-one demo for you and talk about your specific scenario. And we are also coming soon, we will have a request that you can select an area, one specific area, and then what kind of data you're looking for, as far as if you're looking for the 2-year event, the 10-year event, a 100-year event, what you're looking for, if you have a specific address that you would like to have us look at or you would like to have studied. And so that's coming soon to our website as well. In addition to that, Flood Predictor is available on the Microsoft Marketplace. You can request Flood Predictor as well as another product we have, Flood Manager, on that marketplace. We are building a plugin for Autodesk for Civil 3D. So for designers that are interested in that, we are also building an add-on to Esri's. And it will be available in the Esri marketplace soon. We are also opening up both the Autodesk and the Esri partnerships up to our partners and our customers that might want to beta test those as well. So if you're interested in that, you can contact myself or Katherine about that. And in addition to that, those are delivered as APIs into these particular areas. So if you want to use it to plug into your web portal and be able to see Flood Predictor results on top of your existing data, that's available to you. But if you don't have the capability of introducing an API, we can do that ourselves for you. We can, as well as we can build the web portal for you, much like we've done for Tennessee. So there's lots of ways to access Flood Predictor, lots of ways that you can get to Flood Predictor. So with that, I wanted to also say that we have another client example of a single address. If you're interested in the risk factor for a single address, we've done this for a client, Walton Street Capital, and they are looking at their unrealized risk at their portfolio of properties. So if you have a portfolio of properties that you would like to have us look at, we can do that and produce a report for you as well. And in the Tennessee example, this is the one that Kent talked about earlier. We've won multiple awards, the ACEC Engineering Award in Tennessee for surveying and mapping, and then a national award with maps. So with that, I'm going to try to share my screen.
We can see it. Thanks, Susan.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. So I'm going really rogue here, and I'm going to show you a live demonstration of TM Plan. This is the community portal that Kent talked about earlier and the introduction of Flood Predictor. And so what you see on the screen is the state of Tennessee and the 6 counties that we have implemented the integration of Flood Predictor into TM Plan are along the Mississippi River, the incident that Kent talked about, and there's 6 counties here that we've actually done the integration. The boundaries of the counties are in blue, and then all these little squiggly lines that you see is the HUC 12 boundaries, or better known as maybe the watersheds in these areas. And so I've selected a watershed over here. I'll zoom into it over here in Ripley, Tennessee. And so that is the Upper Cane Creek watershed. I can also select by a watershed specifically if I have one, but most people don't know the actual name of the watershed. But if I did, I could. And I can have the reoccurrence. We prepared watershed boundaries for them in the runoff intervals of the 2-year all the way up to the 500-year. So if I wanted to look at let's just say I want to look at the 2-year event of probability, it's going to show that for me, and it will take just a second for it to refresh the screen for that. And once it does that, I'll not only have the probability, but now I also have the prediction. And this is the prediction of the inundation of flooding for this particular area. I can zoom into that and look at it. Both I can look at the street. I have the hybrid level, so I can see the terrain around it and the well-known areas of interest there. I can also go to a particular address if I want to. And this particular address, I have already run I've run a prediction right here already in this particular watershed. And so if I turn the prediction on, if I turn it on, you can see that I've got the watershed prediction on there, and I can also then turn on the depth. So now I can see I ran it for 6 inches of rain in a 24-hour period in this particular watershed. And so I'm going to zoom out a little bit so you can kind of look at that a bit. You can see this particular watershed. And I'm also going to now turn on the FEMA flood layer. What we have run in the event that I just ran was for flash flooding. And the flood area that we're looking at the FEMA, for the FEMA data, is the riverine, for the river. So you can see that the riverine is showing the area that would be flooded per the FEMA map. But as I begin to look, you can see that in areas that have creeks and other areas that would have potentially flash flooding, we don't have that. We don't have that available. And so this one particular area that we're looking at right here, in this area that I just searched for, if I look at this area and I now turn on the hybrid data, so you can see in this particular area, there's going to be quite a bit of flash flooding, and something that they wouldn't necessarily know. So I have the ability to actually do a weather prediction, a what if prediction, or I can actually bring in the weather from the National Weather Service. So I have both those things available to me to look at that. And so now I have the ability to do some planning and all that sort of thing. So in this particular prediction of 6 inches in this watershed, you can see that the runoff would be about 3.28 inches. And the depth in this particular area, or any area in this watershed that I wanted to look at, you can see right here, you've got the flood depth right there. In addition, in this particular portal, we've got some frequently asked questions, and we have some information about Flood Predictor. So for those people that are interested in knowing more about Flood Predictor, we've got a paper that explains it for you. And it even gets into some of the actual, the machine learning, how it works, the output, some of the input data for this particular data set, and that sort of thing. And then we also have frequently asked questions. So like, what is a HUC? You know, what is it? A watershed boundary, a hydraulic unit code is a HUC. And then what are these reoccurrence intervals? What are they? So these are just some of the frequently asked questions that we have available on this particular site. So as we go back to the, I'm going to stop sharing now and go back. Give you just a few little things about what's coming soon. We have a white paper available right now. You'll have a link to that on the when we do the recording and we give you the webinar. So this is a peer-reviewed white paper that explains in great detail how it works, and we're getting great feedback from the science community that are doing the peer reviews for this particular paper. And in addition, we have a lot of things coming down the pike. This is our roadmap for Flood Predictor. We are releasing very soon. Like I said, we already have released our flash flooding, our riverine flooding APIs coming soon. And we're also, as I showed you the example of the depth, We also have combined both flash and fluvial riverine flooding. And then I explained that some of these Autodesk plugins and the ESRI plugin are coming. Coastal modeling, we hope to have coming in late this year, early next year. And then we have, again, the QA/QC notebook and the reporting functionality coming soon as well. So with that, we'll open it up for questions. Let's see if we have any questions on our, if anyone has actually created any questions for us today. Here's one for Curtis. Good, thank you. Laura?
Yes, so our first question, does Flood Predictor pair with any water quality modeling applications?
Assaad, do you want to take that or do you want me to respond?
Go ahead, Curtis.
Sure. The easy answer is right now, no. However, this type of data and empirical analysis rather than physics-based models is a good way to explain water quality as well. I know we had one of the initial pilot projects was actually kind of modeling giardia in some water bodies and so forth. So maybe not the same type of water quality you were talking about, but I guess the point being is this type of exercise could, I think, pair with water quality modeling, even if it's not, you know, the objective of Flood Predictor at this point.
Thanks, Curtis. Next question. What is the smallest scale this could be applied to?
Go ahead and take that. So for Flood Predictor uses the best publicly available elevation model and uses the scale of that elevation model to produce the outputs. Now in the United States, we have elevation models at a 10 meter by 10 meter cell size for the whole country, but there are higher resolution areas, especially urban, going down to 3 meters and 1 meter. So it is as high resolution as the best available digital elevation model.
Perfect. Thanks, Assaad.
And just
Next.
to tack on to that,
Curtis,
maybe real quickly before we move on. So I think what maybe it was Susan who showed, but the Walton Street project was showing results at a property level. So certainly you can show the results at a small scale like that, but it's the actual product is run on a watershed scale that's about 30 square miles-ish, 50 kilometers-ish. So, you know, you could scale it up or down pretty easily from there.
Perfect. Thank you for adding on to that, Curtis. Our next question, can Flood Predictor model real-time snow melt flood prediction?
So I can go ahead and take that too. Flood Predictor is a flood inundation mapping tool. So it's so basically what Flood Predictor provides you is with a map showing the probability of flooding in different areas on a map. Now the inputs to Flood Predictor are stream flow and runoff from a specific weather event on the area of interest. But the stream flow that we provide to Flood Predictor is a combination of runoff from the local area where we're interested, but also to contributions to the base flow, which do include snow melt. So this is how Flood Predictor does include predictions or models of snow melt. It is because it retrieves a stream flow input as one of its necessary ingredients to produce an output. And currently in the United States, we use the National Water Model, which is a modular model which includes a snowmelt module to provide predictions and current events for stream flow.
Perfect. Thank you, Assaad. Our next question, can this be used outside of the US, for instance, in Ontario, Canada?
Would you like to answer that, Curtis?
Sure. Yeah. The short answer is yes, it can be used. The current version of Flood Predictor, which is version 1.3, is geared to work in the US, but we've already done some exercises with some potential clients in Canada to confirm that the same type of data is publicly available and could be used to make predictions outside the US. And even more than that, I mean, from when we first started developing Flood Predictor, the thought was making sure that the framework could work anywhere, you know, even outside of North America. But certainly the focus so far has been on the US mostly because that's where the clients have been. But as we gain new clients and add new features, I definitely see as expanding to Canada as being a pretty good next step.
Awesome. Thanks, Curtis. Next question is API Autodesk plugin.
I'll take that one.
Thanks, Susan.
The API is an application programming interface. And what we have done is built an API plugin for Autodesk, and we're building one for Esri as well. And so when you download the API into your application, it is basically just becomes a button on your ribbon where you just, when you press it, it will call out Flood Predictor and show you the results from Flood Predictor for that particular area. I hope that answered your question.
Fabulous. Thank you, Susan. Next question is for Curtis. Is Flood Predictor a 1D or 2D model?
Yeah, so I think maybe Assaad explained that it's not necessarily a traditional model. So the traditional physics-based models like HEC-RAS or some of the other software have 1D components, they have 2D components. Because it's not working in the same way, it's kind of a best of both worlds. So we end up using 2D data, so the results look very 2D. Maybe if you can think back to when Susan was sharing her screen, it's that grid-like result that you come to expect with a 2D model, but we can also train off of one-dimensional models. So there's a lot of really good one-dimensional models out there that we want to train off of, as well as, you know, 2D models. So we kind of get to leverage both and deliver a 2D output.
Perfect. Next question. How does Flood Predictor perform in urban areas?
Start off. And I think there's two parts to this question. The first part I want to say is Flood Predictor outputs are only as good as the physics-based models we use to build it and train it. Especially the machine learning piece of Flood Predictor. And therefore, I want to explain a little bit about the characteristics of the HEC-RAS models that were used to train the machine learning model. But before I do that, I also want to explain how before we do any kind of analysis, of machine learning analysis, we do use the raw land cover data to separate out impervious layers on the ground, like, for example, paved areas and urban areas, and indicate these as high runoff generation locations. Now, in terms of the HEC-RAS models that were used to train the machine learning model, I'm going to turn it to Curtis, who really had a hand in developing a lot of these 2D models that we use to train our machine learning model. And how do they? So Curtis, my question would be, how did these account for urban flow?
Yeah, it's interesting. So we have a good situation with the data we were able to train off of because we used some highly detailed 2D models that also accounted for stormwater routing. So, you know, you kind of either get one or the other, large scale models that don't account for those types of things or really detailed models that do. We're able to leverage some existing studies that had a really high level of detail, but also covered a large area, which gave us a lot of training data to go off of. So there's some general assumptions about, you know, how much stormwater capacity could be absorbed by a given, you know, community's urban system, but usually it's somewhere in the range of, you know, 5 to 10 year storm events. And people are designing more resilient than that now. But we're able to train off of real data that kind of span that, and the actual models routed that flow from the street down to the river system. So it'll actually show the kind of more realistic flooding where, you know, your stormwater system is routing the first bit of rainfall to the river's expanding, but then once it becomes overwhelmed, you'll see those urban areas become more flooded. So again, that to be able to model that in a HEC-RAS model or something would take a lot of time and level of effort, but the fact that we're able to leverage those past studies to make predictions on the fly much quicker is kind of the advantage.
Thank you, Curtis. And that being said, Flood Predictor does not replace smaller scale design analyses and studies where you'll be looking, for example, at installing a pipe to reroute flow. It is really used to help you throughout your process of designing by planning, by reducing your initial cost to see and your risk and guide you toward your best solution. So really important to get to revisit the point that Katherine and Susan have mentioned in the beginning, that Flood Predictor is not designed and has not been built to replace the traditional ways of modeling and providing engineering analyses. On the contrary, it is to make that easier, faster, and cheaper.
Okay, thank you. With that, we've responded to every question that we've received. If anyone has any additional questions, please feel free to add them in now. Otherwise, we will share closing words. Yeah. Sorry, Susan, go ahead.
I was just going to say also, if you have things that you would like to ask individually of Katherine or myself, our contact information is on the screen. So with that, I would say thank you all very much for your time. We appreciate it, and we hope to hear from you soon.
Thank you. That concludes our webinar.
Thank you.